Welcome back, everybody. We are continuing our budget talks on now as pertains to the creative sector. And with me this morning to continue ventilating that topic is Nigel Campbell, who is the co-host of Music Matters, the Caribbean edition, as well as Laura Dowrich Phillips, who is the co-host as well, Music Matters, the Caribbean edition. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Good morning.
So before we go into the main part of the topic, let's speak about Music Matters a little bit, Laura.
Yes. Music Matters is a podcast that Nigel and I started probably almost 3 years ago. It was born out of our very passionate discussions about music and about culture and the arts in general. We'd have these long, passionate discussions about these things. And we decided to turn it into a podcast. So it is about music, the business of music in the Caribbean. We talk about, things that we could do to promote our music, to get our music out there, to get our sector organized.
Now, in this time where we are facing the pandemic, we have seen where music, which is a part of the creative industry, has been really, really badly affected. And a lot of questions have to be asked. Now, we were just having a conversation with Rubadiri Victor as pertains to his suggestions, when it comes to the 2021 budget and what he believes the government should be taking into consideration. But I want to know from your side of things, what should the government be taking into consideration regarding the creative sector when formulating the 2021 budget?
Good question, Carrie. I believe the government really should have, before they start taking anything into consideration, they should have had discussions with the actual practitioners in the sector, not just the technocrats. I know there are people in the creative sector who've come together and they've put together a bunch of proposals for the government. I believe Rubadiri was part of that. I think they need to listen to them to understand where they are right now, what are their particular needs right now, and how the sector functions. So we see cases where grants were given by the Ministry of Culture to artists. That left out a whole bunch of people who belong to the creative sector because they just didn't qualify. So
Right.
the government needs to understand what is the creative sector, how big it is, different segments that make up the creative sector, because it's not just fashion, it's not just music. There's so many other players involved in the creative sector, and they really need to have an idea of what it is. I also believe that the government, in designing a budget, need to really think about what kind of society we want to create, especially post-COVID. How are we going to revive this entire society? What are these issues we need to address? And understand that the creative sector has a place in that. All over the world, there are discussions happening about the creative sector and how it can play a role in reshaping and reviving society post-COVID. And we need to take that into consideration when we're planning anything in this country going forward.
And Nigel, I want to jump to you now. What are some of the challenges that the creative sector, aside from the obvious, is facing right now, especially in this time of a pandemic?
Well, I think key among those problems is funding. And that has always been, for eons, has been a problem in terms of funding. There's a consideration that happened, and one of the things that I remember reading in the PNM manifesto, which is supposed to be for our policy, is a discussion that the creative sector is an part of the informal sector, so that actual recognition of the sector by the government is not the same as the manufacturing or something like that. And as a consequence, other sectors like the financial sector, the financial services sector, the banking sector, view the creative sector differently as they would say, the manufacturing sector. And I think that whole mindset is something that has to change going forward, because oil and gas will finish. And I think it's incumbent upon us in the creative sector, one, to be a significant collective, but secondly, for the state to be on the same page as it was, to recognize us and to have conversations with us that actually make some sense.
This leads me to my next question. I want to ask you both individually. Should the creative sector take responsibility for stimulating the sector itself?
Well, the creative sector can do only so much, right? The creative sector, one of the flaws, and I use the word flaw probably guardedly, is that there's the idea of a collective, right? A collective voice to do some advocacy and to do negotiations with the state and other private sector stakeholders. That hasn't happened, certainly in music. And although we have a collective body for panmen and a collective body for calypsonians, in terms of trade issues, they have not been very effective. And certainly there's a kind of yawning gap between what exists in the music industry. I could speak of because I'm a promoter also.
Right.
That there is a kind of gap that exists certainly between a collective voice, an advocate voice for the music industry that just doesn't exist.
What do you
And
think is the
possibly
solution to that?
well, leadership is one of those things that has to come to the fore. I mean, we have had a lot of persons who put themselves up, but it's a very difficult exercise to get creative people to come together in a large way, right? It's much easier for engineers or manufacturers or energy companies to do that kind of stuff. But it seems, based on historical evidence, it's very difficult for anybody to come together. I mean, Calypsonians did come together, but in terms of the effectiveness going forward, in terms of the wider trade issues, more than just saying, okay, we're in a Calypso tent every carnival. We have 365 days a year. There has to be some kind, admittedly, there's a kind of movement and modernization of Tuku, but that's just one organization. We have many other sectors, as Laura mentioned, within the music industry, and certainly the wider creative industry.
Well, the creatives that came together with Ruben Reed Victor, the Artist Coalition, they have come together to try to make some change and to help push the industry forward. What do you say to that, Laura?
That is a good step, but we need them to not just be advocates in a moment. And I agree with Nigel. We need they need an association, and I know that this is a discussion that was happening in music circles. Certainly, there needs to be a permanent body that can do those negotiations, as Nigel said, and also to do things on behalf of the sector, conduct workshops, liaise with international bodies for grants, for scholarships, to do professional training. There are a lot of, this period here has exposed a lot of issues within the creative sector in terms of, how people see themselves, branding, how people conduct business. And it is forcing people to realize that they have to operate in a certain way. And I definitely believe a permanent association, a permanent body that can oversee the creative sector in a real way is the way to go going forward.
We have seen cases where persons within the industry, both locally and internationally, have created pockets of opportunity. Do you think we could take a page out of that book?
Well, it's already happening here. I mean, there are individuals who have taken advantage of this time to drive things forward. Best example I can think of right now is Kenny Phillips. We had him on our podcast. Kenny Phillips is the owner of WAC Radio Station, and since March, he has been doing live shows twice a week. He's been, having entertainers on, and he gets his list diaspora mainly to donate. And so the performers can have a way of making money on his shows. We have the Exo Dance Group. They have been conducting classes online and teaching people how to dance to soca. And they've been reaching audiences all over the world, exporting our culture online. We have Mervyn DeGosh, who is going to be soon doing a production on YouTube called Scrubbing Benches, which is, it's a virtual production. It's a first, I think, for me. I've heard about in the theater industry doing something virtually. It's a paid event, so people will get paid, the actors get paid, the producers get paid. So people are doing things. I think the problem is that a lot of people don't really understand the virtual space, and they don't understand how to monetize it. So that has been a major challenge for a lot of creatives, because it wasn't something that was foremost for them, because everything was about live gigs and live performances and live events. So now we are forced to look at the virtual space and figure out different business models and different ways of monetizing it.
Nigel, we have just about 30 seconds. Just before we go, how do you see that practice being done on a broader scale to impact the entire industry rather than small pockets here and there?
Well, I think that is the issue. Small pockets do exist. A larger collective of persons thinking and being on the same page, thinking business-wise. I mean, it's one thing to do a little performance on a live stream, but it's a business we are operating in, and that is a thing that a government listens to. Businesses making money, paying taxes. How difficult it is? It happens very scattershot, but I think it can happen, and it's possibly going to happen if this COVID pandemic continues into 2021 and it affects Carnival which affects a large majority of, say, the music industry.
All right,
So
well, I
we'll
want
see
to
what
thank
happens
you
going
so
forward.
much. We're going to continue ventilating that topic, but we do have to go to the news, to the top of the hour there. So I want to thank you so much, both of you, for joining us this morning, Nigel Campbell and Laura Dorich Phillips, both co-hosts of Music Matters, the Caribbean edition.